Welcome to this MBS webinar, Delivering Sustainable Water Management, part of our current series on sustainability, and today with Everflow Water. Some quick housekeeping. To avoid feedback and other sound issues, your microphones will be muted. You can ask questions during the webinar using the question box within the platform, which should be to the side of your screen. All your questions will be captured and answered as part of the follow-up after the webinar ends. You can always get in touch with us if you do have additional questions after the session as well. My name is Paul and I'm Head of Technical Solutions at MBS, working with customers to help them use MBS platforms successfully. I'm glad to be joined today by Claire Galland, Water Efficiency and Environmental Services Manager at Everflow Water, one of the new independent water supply and technology companies that have emerged with real ambition and sustainability aims in recent years. Today's session is divided between me and Claire. I'll begin by providing some context around sustainable outcomes and water targets in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. Then Claire will provide her expertise on sustainability and water services. The presentation looks at understanding water use, how we can change design and personal behaviours to use water more sustainably, and some of the technical aspects of water efficiency in detail. I've then got a number of questions for Claire, and we'll discuss water issues in conversation. Finally, I'll briefly demonstrate how water content is covered in MBS Chorus and MBS Source data. So let's consider water in context of the much wider conversation around sustainability targets. In terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, water is clearly part of that conversation in many of those themes. In particular, clean water and sanitation, life below water, but also sustainable consumption, life on land, climate action, sustainable cities and communities, and innovation in infrastructure. In this UN publication about the goals, in terms of the COVID pandemic, it was estimated that 3 billion people didn't have access to hand washing facilities, very limited levels of sanitation within their particular countries. The latest UN Water Development Report valuing water looks at water resources worldwide, and whether that's water scarcity or pollution or flooding, which are often seasonal. And this map from the WRI Aqueduct tools, which is available to navigate for water stress, to overlay seasonal data and the potential risk of flooding and so on, for various places in the world. And it's estimated that 20% of infrastructure spending needs to be on water and sanitation, particularly for the global south, where increasing urbanism is going to need rapid development of water infrastructure. I recently read Aquitecture, a book about designing in and on water, and thinking about master planning hydroscapes, where buildings need to take high water levels into consideration. We see this in the history and future of Venice, but also with new floating developments in Amsterdam and other places, and having to think about how we build on our coastline and on low-lying areas in the future. You may have seen the world's water diagram by the US Geographical Society, showing the very small amounts of clean water that are shared across the globe. But water obviously doesn't stay in one place, it's constantly moving, and much is in the atmosphere. But further to those UN statistics, we are in the midst of a water emergency globally. And there are multiple risks associated with water insecurity, including economic and financial threats, in terms of successful agriculture, personal health, but also things like tourism and property. And that lack of clean water, not just in terms of the recent pandemic, but in terms of other diseases that have been eradicated in some parts of the world, but still impact low-income nations, often because of a lack of clean water. And then to remember that supplying clean water and removing waste across nations is a really carbon-intensive and expensive practice. So many of those aspects are global issues that are likely to be discussed at COP26, but water management is a very national and regional activity. Which is why I'm pleased today to be joined by Claire Galland from Everflow Water, who's going to provide that perspective for us. Thanks, Claire.
Hello, I'm Claire Galland. I'm the Water Efficiency and Environmental Services Manager at Everflow Water. We're the largest independent water retailer in the UK and the fastest growing company in Europe this year, reaching 100 employees in 5 years. We serve 65,000 non-household customers in England and Scotland, and we're growing by more than 1,400 a month. So today I'm going to talk you through a few things. I'm going to have a quick recap about the water cycle because I'm not sure how much any of you know about that. I'm going to talk about some of the issues that are coming up in terms of providing water and sustainable wastewater services, and some ways that you can find out more information and you can future-proof your designs and specifications. I'll go through some of the solutions in a lot more detail and talk about standards and what we're doing as a business ourselves. So I'm not just preaching at you, I'm talking about what we're actually doing too. So the first slide is a graphic that kindly was supplied to me by Northumbrian Water. There's a limited amount of fresh usable water on Earth. Fortunately, water is naturally recycled through the water cycle. Wholesale water companies tap into this natural water cycle and clean fresh water so that it's safe enough to drink. But after the water's been used, they clean it again before returning it to the environment to rejoin the natural water cycle. Some of the issues that are affecting this water cycle and the urban water cycle, I'm going to detail now. So these are the needs why we need to take action. The nation's water usage is increasing, rain is less frequent and more intense, and existing infrastructure isn't fit for purpose. Sewer networks usually combine surface and foul water, if not at property level, then somewhere further down the pipe. And while modern developments may separate foul and surface water, water companies don't always adequately upgrade their infrastructure accordingly. So as a nation, we need to allow for economic growth, new housing developments, to alleviate the housing crisis, immigration to fill skills gap in the labour force, it's very current at the moment, and intensive farming to feed workers and their families. So that means that there's less and less room and resources for nature that we're taking from. And this is having quite a serious impact on insects, animals and plant life, as well as putting the reliability of our water supplies at risk, particularly in certain parts of the country, but it is a national problem. Droughts and taking too much water out of rivers and aquifers can have a particularly serious impact on pollinating insects our food chain relies on. And using too much water also produces excess carbon emissions, contributing to further climate change. So I've given you all the problems, but there are solutions to this available. We just need to accelerate the uptake. Without action, we'll face a water supply deficit of over 3,400 million litres of water a day in England by 2050 due to population growth, climate change, and the need to protect and restore the environment. So that's within a lot of our lifetimes. Failure to act now poses severe risks to our economy, society and the environment. And reducing water demand through leakage reduction and water efficiency is crucial, and that's what my role is at Everflow Water. I'm going to point you towards some sources of information where you can find out more about the particular areas you might be building in or specifying for. All wholesale water companies are required to publish water resource management plans every 5 years. They do this at both a company level, but also a regional level. They're collaborating in particular regions of the country. They also produce drought plans, which detail the measures they'll take when things are particularly tight in terms of water supply. So you can check these to understand their climate and water supply predictions, their expectations, and what they need from the developments that you're contributing towards. Wholesalers can use pressure management, for example, to reduce leaks and water consumption during peak periods, during droughts. Some may use emergency resources like desalination plants if necessary. But ultimately, your end users who use the buildings and you're specifying and designing for can be experiencing temporary use bans or rota cuts. And peak demand during the extreme hot weather in 2018 increased by 10% less for metered customers. So when customers are able to see their usage, it helps with demand management. Water companies also produce drainage and wastewater management plans. They are currently in the first 5-year cycle of doing this. They didn't have to produce them before. And now they're much more collaborative. You might find that you're invited to be consulted about these or input into them in some way. And they also offer a level of regional coordination, because obviously some catchments for rivers, where the water comes from for a particular river, may cross boundaries between different water companies and local authorities. So the aim of drainage and wastewater management plans is to ensure that drainage systems are robust and resilient, so they can withstand and bounce back from future pressures like heavy rainfall and drought. So I'm just going to give you a few facts and figures here, just to bring some of my points home, really. People treat water like an infinite resource, yet only 5% of the water on the planet is safe to drink. It takes energy. Actually, 6% of energy used in the UK is on water. The energy is used to treat it, to transport it and heat it in our homes, as well as build and maintain water and wastewater networks. So reducing water consumption is an important part of meeting COP26 net zero goals, and a large proportion of the carbon in water use is on water heating. Things you can do, you would be designing and specifying for solar water heating panels and storage on buildings. That could make significant savings on energy bills. On top of this, the amount of water we all use per head has actually doubled to 142 litres per person per day since the 1960s. We need to halve it again before it becomes an emergency, really. Early indications from the Environment Bill suggest that a national government target will be set of around 15% reduction by 2040. And you may have heard the adage, what gets measured gets done. Well, an important principle in behavioural economics is indeed feedback. If people can see the difference their actions could make and are making, they're much more likely to stick to a change in behaviour. Diet programmes make great use of this. Another principle is social proof. Seeing how you compare to others influences your behaviour. We're social animals, as the pandemic has shown us. Having accurate real-time data about usage helps water companies spot leaks fast and helps customers reduce their usage. And this requires smart water meters. While some water companies are rolling these out fairly fast, for example, Anglian Water and Thames Water, a lot of them are taking a long time. So just a bit of background here about how properties connect to the wastewater networks, probably revision for a lot of you. Each property is connected to its own drain, which is the responsibility of the property owner until it reaches a shared drain or goes outside the land. This drain is connected to a main sewer in the road near the property, which is looked after by wholesale water companies. The foul sewer pipe is for used water and goes to a sewage treatment works. Surface water pipes are designed to take rainwater only and lead directly to a stream or river with no treatment. At least that's the theory. Surface water pipes are often separate from foul sewer pipes in homes built after the 1920s. However, both these pipes often eventually go into a combined sewer, and flooding can occur where separate sewers come together. So just a little bit more about combined sewers. Combined sewers, which majority of the housing stock in the UK have, they take both surface water and sewage into the same pipe. In normal weather, this mixture is all treated at sewage treatment works. But in heavy rain, combined sewers can be overwhelmed and flood homes and businesses. Storm overflows release excess water into rivers and the sea, passing it through screens to avoid passing litter into the natural environment. So flooding is really destructive. We've had a few events in the UK recently where we've seen what it can do. Luckily, we haven't had anything like Germany where they've actually had loss of life. It's destructive to both the property and the structure of buildings, and it's happening more frequently. Sewer flooding is particularly bad because it has associated health risks. But there's some figures there on the slide. Obviously, thousands of people suffering from sewer flooding indoors, and quite a lot more suffering from sewer flooding outdoors, on the curtilage and in the gardens and grounds as well. If you add fluvial flooding, say from rivers, on top of this, then the numbers actually skyrocket. So putting the wrong things down drains causes blockages, slow smelly drains and flooding. Fats and oils from kitchens solidify to form huge lumps that block sewer pipes called fatbergs. You can see one here. Sewers were only built for the 3 Ps, toilet paper, pee and poo, and rainwater, of course. But wastewater companies find all sorts in their sewers. Mobile phones, wipes, nappies, and even poo bear. There have been some high-profile prosecutions recently around pollution. Wholesale water companies don't always do the right thing, but blocked sewers, heavy rain and tree roots, or misconnected sewer pipes also play their part in the pollution of our waterways. Not all doom and gloom, though. There are solutions within our grasp. So I'm just going to talk you through some ways you can future-proof designs and specifications for built environments. And I'd like you to just think about, while we're going through, how could you help reduce or cope with droughts and flooding and provide value for your clients, which would ultimately aid you with acquisition and retention. Our main driver at Everflow is we want to do the right thing, but we also see it as a commercial advantage for ourselves as well. So what were once thought to be 1 in 30-year events are actually becoming more frequent. Your customers could see future-proof designs as added value or corporate social responsibility, meeting their priorities for that. And it could make the difference between winning a contract or not. You could even work with developer services providers to make the site completely water neutral. Ofwat's Innovation Fund has just announced that it's supporting Affinity Water to trial water neutral developments in the east of England with Equality. So I'll now go through some of the things designers and specifiers can do in detail. So leakage is a major source of inefficient use of water, and it's treated water that is basically not being used for what it was being treated for. You could think about where water mains and sewers could go so that they're accessible for maintenance and repairs. You can also minimise their length and joins, corners and other stress points where leaks could occur. Finding and fixing leaks is a major cost, and reinstatement is always an issue, which prevents many leaks from actually getting fixed. So you could consider designing buildings with leak detector chambers, either on each floor or for each office indoors. And you could design in multiple flow monitors or smart automated read submeters outside to help locate external leaks quickly. This is especially useful on larger sites where undetected leaks can cost tens of thousands of pounds over relatively short periods of time. AMR meters can alert building managers to a burst via mobile networks almost immediately, and also provide accurate meter readings to allow clients to track their usage over time. In my experience, many leak detectors are cheap to buy, but they do lock the customer into a contract in order to view their data. So you could try to find ones that facilities managers and ordinary users can easily read themselves than having to log on to some sort of portal. If you're linking to an aging network of customer-side pipes, you could consider replacing the pipework completely before you connect. One burst being fixed on older pipework can quickly lead to other bursts elsewhere. Another tip would be to ensure that pipework is laid with adequate protective backfill materials like pea gravel or sand. This will not only help protect pipes from freezing, but will also protect them from underground movement during severe drought. This work is often carried out by the construction company's ground workers who don't have so much experience in the water sector. Another tip would be to use plastic, so that's MDPE or HDPE water pipes wherever possible. On external underground pipework, this gives some elasticity, which helps to combat the effects of pipe movement. This pipework is also far more robust to temperature change than metallic pipework. And when laying new underground pipes, it's best to specify to always use the longest unbroken roll of pipe again, to minimise those stress points. Building control valves or taps should always be positioned for easy access in case of an emergency burst, so that people can turn the water off easily. You should ensure relevant control or valve keys for new developments are handed over as part of the process. In addition, you could provide the plans of external water mains to show the shut-off points. And lagging, you've probably heard of this with winter coming up. Lagging smaller internal and external pipes, and even going as far as using trace heating on pipework susceptible to the cold. The sort of places you'd use that would be in loading bays, garage areas and basements. And it's relevant for both drinkable water systems and exposed sewer pipework. So, as I mentioned before, what gets measured gets done. Customers on water meters use less than those not on meters. This is because they think more about their water use, as they can save money by saving water. Traditional meter readings are taken manually, most a few times a year, but smart meters provide readings hourly or more, so they're much more able to respond to them and actually do something about leaks and unusual usage levels. Problem is that wholesalers' costs are mainly committed to maintaining and upgrading existing infrastructure networks, and a large part of customer bills is actually fixed. It's not related to how much they use. Most meters are over 20 years old as well. Replacing them can cost a lot compared to all the other commitments wholesalers have, so they often aren't prioritised. On top of that, actually smart meter rollout is patchy and slow, and only a small proportion of water meters are currently smart. Some wholesalers like Anglian and Thames in London and East of England have really ambitious smart metering programs funded by customers. It's no coincidence that their water resources are based in the eastern area of the UK that's classed as the most water stressed, the desert of England. So water retailers are lobbying Ofwat at the minute for meter ownership and the responsibility for maintaining, replacing and reading meters to be removed from wholesalers. Mosul, the market operator for non-households, is undertaking a review of meter responsibilities as we speak, and the industry really needs competitive contracts for meter management to provide consistency between different wholesaler regions of England and put metering higher up the list of priorities. You can play your part too by specifying that you want smarter water meters for your sites to your water wholesaler. So here are some of the water saving fixtures and fittings that you can specify or design in to your plans. Push or sensor operated taps, tap and shower aerators, flow limiting or pressure reducing valves. They can all be retrofitted on existing building stock, but new developments should really have these as standard by now. Water efficient taps with aerators can consume 75% less water, and dual flush and other innovative toilets can use 75% less water than the old 10-litre single flush systems. If customers use less hot water, they're also saving on their energy bills and carbon emissions. When specifying toilets, for example, try to choose dual flush mechanisms, but not just the standard ones, but ones that make it obvious which button is for big and small flushes and aren't easy to flush the wrong one or both by mistake. I've actually, in my role so far, I've not found a very wide choice of suppliers of eco or water efficient products in the market. So there could be some opportunities to market new water efficient products for some of you. We're actually a tech company and believe in keeping things simple. So we're innovating in how customers can identify opportunities for them to save water without needing to send out costly consultants to site. This could potentially be applied to building designs before they're even built. So if you're interested in discussing this, do get in touch with Make Me Green at everflowwater.com. A little bit about national standards and some funding opportunities now. So there are going to be opportunities to develop and market new water saving products. DEFRA, for example, is introducing mandatory water efficiency labels for domestic and business water using products. In 2022, the government's publishing a roadmap for how it and others will ensure new developments in existing buildings are water efficient. This includes accommodating adoption of water-saving technologies like rainwater harvesting and water reuse. In England, over 27 litres can be knocked off our average daily water use per person by combining a label with product and building standards. So if we can see the impact of what we're buying, we'll all buy differently. There's also some tax relief available on capital investment in plant and machinery at the minute, and that's around until 2023 for now. I've put the link on the slide there for you. I wanted to talk a little bit about how people can capture their own water. We often hear from end users that water falls from the sky, why do I have to pay for it? Well, if they want to capture their own, this is how. Where there's adequate roof space and outdoor space for storing water tanks, something to note is that underground water tanks are a lot less unsightly, but they are much more costly. So great if you can design them in at an early stage, not so great to retrofit. A rainwater harvesting system can save a lot on water supply bills, but not necessarily on wastewater bills if it still needs to go down the drain. And I'll explain some drainage solutions in the next section. Rainwater can be used for flushing toilets, which is the biggest consumer of water at present at home and in offices. It can be used in washing machines as well and other non-drinking usage. You can add treatment to make it drinkable too. A potential barrier to using water butts is their appearance, and aesthetically pleasing ones can be pretty expensive. And you don't necessarily have to do this on an individual unit basis. Community level harvesting systems are now an option on developments or on existing ones with plenty of land. Another source of water saving would be recycling. We call grey water. Grey water is lightly used water from baths, showers, washing machines, dishwashers and sinks. It makes up between 50 and 80% of a household's wastewater and probably more in a commercial setting. This water is typically used for flushing toilets or irrigating plants. There are specialists who provide grey water recycling systems for large buildings, but there are also simple systems in development at the minute at a small business and household level, which directly link individual appliances to recycle grey water. For example, by filling toilet cisterns directly from shower trays. So just thinking about the drainage side of things now, diverting rainwater away from the sewers before it enters natural watercourses is a really important way of preventing flooding. I've put an example of a swale basin in North East England on the right there in dry weather and then underneath after heavy rain. These can be pleasant green-leaf spaces and provide wildlife habitats as well. Thinking about all of our individual behaviour is useful as well. Reducing the chance of blocked sewers by only putting toilet paper, pee and poo down the loo is something everyone can help to do. Lots of wipes, while they're actually marketed as flushable, i.e. they'll disappear from the pan, they get stuck elsewhere and don't break down quickly enough, which causes blockages. While you can't control what end users do, designers and specifiers can use more permeable surfaces, for example, capture rainwater for use elsewhere and ensure that pipework's optimised. So here's a summary of the different solutions, ranging from end users to wholesalers, water wholesalers to yourselves. As you can see, we can all play a part. To finish, I'd just like to give some examples of what we're doing at Everflow towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Countries are being asked to come up with ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets that align with limiting the global average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. That's what would avoid catastrophic climate change. We're definitely already going to get some. And the reductions targets are also aimed at securing global net zero emissions by 2050. So to deliver on these stretching targets, countries will need to do the following. They need to accelerate the phase out of coal and encourage investment in renewables. So as a business, we're encouraging helping our business customers to fix leaks and use water efficiently. That will ultimately limit and reduce their carbon emissions. We're also reducing our own by switching to energy suppliers like Microtricity, who source their energy entirely from renewables and support green lobbying. Curtailing deforestation is another one of the ways that's specified in the Sustainable Development Goals. So as a business, we follow zero waste and circular principles such as paperless offices, using recycled products where possible, and recycling waste. We're also planning how we can make our customer water supplies carbon neutral by doing things like planting trees. Another one of the Sustainable Development Goals is speeding up the switch to electric vehicles. We've just discovered a new scheme by Octopus, who have launched a salary sacrifice scheme for employers to help employees access electric vehicles. But the climate is already changing, and it's going to continue to change even as we reduce emissions with devastating effects. So in the Sustainable Development Goals, they specify we all need to play our part to enable and encourage countries affected by climate change to protect and restore ecosystems. And as a business, the work included in our water efficiency strategy and action plan is going to help water wholesalers to reduce the amount of water they need to abstract from the environment to meet our customers' needs. And the way we see it is our actions can then be used as an example to pave the way for other countries to adopt similar actions. Another way that is specified in the Sustainable Development Goal is to build defences, warning systems and resilient infrastructure and agriculture to avoid loss of homes, livelihood and even lives. Our work in water efficiency also includes measures to help to reduce the amount of water entering the wastewater network, to help make this infrastructure more resilient to severe weather. Also, many farmers are among our customers, and we'll be working with them this year to help them reduce their water usage and environmental impact while lowering their bills. So just some tips from my time when I worked in a water wholesaler that I was aware of. There's been some deregulation in the water sector over the last few years, and I just wanted to make sure you're aware that you do have choices. There's now competition being introduced in the developer services market, and that happened in 2019. There's now dozens of self-lay providers. These are infrastructure contractors who can lay multi-utility services, including water, gas, electricity and broadband, but they only use one trench, which saves on time and costs. You can now use these providers instead of the incumbent water wholesalers for most developer services. There's still some stuff that's not contestable work that the wholesalers have to do, but the amount of that is decreasing. There's also new appointments and variations, which are like mini wholesale companies in their own right. These tend to take on the management of the supply and removal of wastewater once large developments have been completed. There's a list of self-lay providers in the WERS register at Lloyd's List, which I've put on your screen. And there's a list of NAVs on the Ofwat website. So I just wanted to make sure you take advantage of this increased choice and flexibility. SLPs and NAVs tend not to get diverted to fixing leaks like some wholesaler laying teams do. Another area that has opened up to competition recently is the space that we now operate in. So until 2017, businesses had no choice but to buy their water and accompanying services from the monopoly water wholesaler in their region. Then Ofwat opened the market up to new entrants and competition to improve service, reduce prices, allow businesses to buy all their utilities from one bundler provider, and improve water efficiency services for non-domestic customers. A market opening for domestic customers is still on the cards, but it's been delayed due to COVID. It was due in 2020. So you now have 20 water retailers to choose from, and you can read about them on the link that I've put there on the screen. So has your company switched water retailer? Speak to your broker or compare the market to ensure you're on the best deal for you. So I think that comes to the end of my section.
Perfect. Thank you, Claire. That's brilliant. So now we've got some time for a bit of a discussion and some questions. So first of all, Claire, do you think that there's enough awareness about water as a core part of the climate emergency? And if not, how do we begin to bridge that knowledge gap?
I do think there is very little awareness about it at the moment. CC Water recently ran some customer research, and they said something like 2 in 5 people in water-stressed areas thought that there was plenty of water in their area.
Right.
So yeah, water it's always been taken for granted, really. And there does need to be more awareness raising. It's difficult to get people to engage with it because it's a low bill compared to energy. Energy costs aren't really taken into account that much. And there's a big debate in the water industry at the moment about, do people value water enough? Should it be more expensive just so that people appreciate it more?
It's interesting.
And the trouble is, a lot of the processes that go into creating the product and doing all the associated services are out of sight. You know, water treatment works, sewage treatment works are always away from populated areas, and all the pipe works obviously underground. You only really notice water companies doing something when the road's being dug up, or there's
but otherwise
some signs.
it seems sort of invisible the rest of the time.
And they do use contractors a lot as well, so you wouldn't necessarily see a sign saying X water company. You would just say something like Fast Flow or Morrison's or whatever.
Yeah. And so, as somebody in the industry with your skills, what is the understanding like? Are you talking about the climate emergency and water infrastructure all the time? Is it something that you're having to educate internally as well?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our workforce, we've got people from energy and sort of customer service backgrounds and technical backgrounds, but they don't necessarily know much about water when they first arrive. They don't necessarily know about the environmental side and how urgent it is when they arrive. But that's part of my role as well. Everybody's got to be engaged internally, at least, to be able to have those conversations with our customers when the time arises.
Sure. And I guess in terms of governance at a regional level, say, or maybe even nationally, how joined up is water strategy towards things like a sustainable future and reducing water use and protecting, homes from flooding, for example? Are things like new technologies and the R&D that you do fairly open, or does it tend to be quite closed in terms of what sharing goes on?
I think in terms of integration, I mean, you can see there when I talked about the wastewater management plans and the water resources management plans, they're completely separate documents.
Right.
And they are supposed to feed into wholesale water companies' 5-year business plans. So that's the point where they come together. But for some companies, knowing the way they work, that might be the first time they come together.
Okay.
There's different departments. They don't necessarily collaborate that much. And people tend to be a specialist in one or the other. There's problems with teams not being able to work across both, because of hygiene reasons and stuff. Crews have to wait a certain amount of time after doing wastewater stuff to be able to work on clean water stuff. So that makes it difficult for some contractors. But in terms of across government and so on, things seem to be happening. There are a lot of regulators in this space. There's not only DEFRA's kind of the Uber person, but then there's a parliamentary committee. There's the EA, the Environment Agency. There's the Drinking Water Inspectorate, and they don't always speak to each other. So it can be a bit tricky as a water company navigating all of that. And I imagine also for you guys as well.
And so as a result of that, do you see that there can be a common focus on sustainability goals? Like, for example, with COP26 coming up, if there was one thing that you hoped would come out of that from a water perspective, what are the kind of goals and targets that should be achievable?
It's really difficult because COP26 is global. And there are certain things that are very particular to each country. Yeah,
of course.
But it's difficult to set like a target or an overall thing globally. But I think certainly for the UK, there is a target that I mentioned of 15% that's being set. That's been consulted around quite widely by DEFRA to make sure it's achievable, but also ambitious enough.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they have to agree something which is, what can our local environment take? We're not taking water from elsewhere in the world. We're taking our own water. It's very local, the environmental impact of taking water out of the environment.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Although they are talking about joining up regions so that, for example, the north can pass water down towards the south. But it's quite expensive to do, and it's kind of not the point. The point is that people need to live more sustainably.
With whatever the local climate and local accessibility allows. Yeah.
Well, and I expect that it'll be included in the levelling up agenda that the government are pursuing at the moment. It would make sense for more people to move out of the south to the north, and they're already starting to do that with the civil service hub, hubs plural in the north, and so on.
One of our previous webinars mentioned that potentially London's climate is going to approach that of Barcelona, and we're obviously going to have dual impact of potential flooding events and increased drought. I guess, what other aspects are you focusing on, in your work, and which of those two kind of provide, the most need for solutions in terms of the work that you do?
I think, we saw a little bit about drought and heat waves in recent years, in recent summers, with people sending out advice about, how to sort of make sure you stay healthy in heat wave. Buildings, again, you really appreciate it when you're in an older building and you can, it's well insulated, just from the cold, but from the heat as well. It's the materials issue and an insulation issue. And, increasingly, when we go in and look at water efficiency, our contractors are finding issues with water quality. So the cleaning regimes in business premises, for example, a lot of people sub it out, and the pipes need to be flushed quite regularly, and descaling is really important as well, to avoid things like Legionella contamination, and it's not being done as well as we would like. People have got a quite cavalier attitude to the risks.
So I suppose that in terms of your work and the work of the company, do you get involved in things like thinking about the future of rivers or, hydropower, or any of those kind of organizations that are working with water in different ways? Or do you tend to have quite a specific focus on water supply and technology?
We're quite interested in innovation. We've been doing some collaborations lately, and we keep an eye on what's happening in the market. I mean, hydropower hasn't got a great potential in the UK. It's all to do with the steepness of the fall on the watercourses, and apart from it's feasible in a few places like Scotland, but not so much in England and Wales. We're interested more and more in the circular economy, and there seem to be opportunities coming up there in terms of waste management, generally, not just water, and making sure that things are used again, really.
Excellent. And you mentioned that one of the ways that designers can have an impact is in terms of managing surface water. And how do we help to do that? So, for example, when you see things like tree planting schemes, are they a positive in terms of avoiding that kind of surface runoff? Is it about having more swales and wetlands being designed into projects? Is it different material choices? What are the best things that people can do?
Obviously, it depends on your site, but tree planting is always good. It takes up water and slows it down. But you wouldn't want loads of trees right next to your buildings, foundations, or your pipes in particular. Because you'll get problems further down the line. Tree roots are naturally drawn to water pipes.
Right.
You can sense the humidity.
Right.
Talk to each other, as we've heard. Recently, trees talk to each other. So they have a pesky way of finding water pipes and damaging them. So they're great, but not too close.
Right.
And I guess the more green areas that can be in a development, so just grass, wild areas that you can fit around, the better. And then you can have things in the car parks are fine, like tree pits and flower beds and things like that. Just be space that can let the water through. And then when you have got a hard surface, there are permeable versions. I don't know if you've seen any of these resin drives that people are getting.
Oh right, yeah.
They're semi-permeable.
I see. Okay.
Not only do they not shed stones everywhere,
right,
but the rain can actually get through them. It doesn't necessarily end up in
okay. So that they are, more of a sustainable drainage.
Yeah,
than
even
just
though they don't
covering
look
things. That's right. I don't think I realised that with some of the ones I've seen recently. And I guess related to that, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned aquitecture, and I think this idea that buildings are eventually going to be designed to float on water or bridge above it, and kind of hydroscaping where landscapes are built in harmony with already kind of flooded coasts, still feel, far enough away to be sort of science fiction. We see examples in Amsterdam and other places. But is that something that water companies are beginning to consider, that some areas are just going to be permanently flooded, the impact on our coastlines and that kind of thing? How do you begin to manage long-term planning in that way?
I haven't really heard anything around that mentioned in the wholesale circles, but then that wasn't my particular area. I think probably the countries where they're most affected are going to be considering those options first, because they're probably expensive. And if they're moving, then how do you make sure that the pipes can handle that? And I think the trend is more towards community level systems,
right?
And that could work, I guess, on a floating structure. But wholesale water companies aren't necessarily set up to provide that. So you might want to be looking at the sort of NAVs and the new entrants to the market for those kinds of solutions, really.
Yeah, understood. I guess, finally, you mentioned a few resources and things that you'd recommend. Where would you suggest going to find more information, and kind of where do you look for, information on environmental aspects of water design?
Well, the EA and DEFRA publish the areas that are water stressed in the country. So there's a map of those. There's wholesale water companies publish a lot on their websites. They're obliged to publish their water resource management plans, the drainage and wastewater management plans, and the sort of drafts of those so that people can comment on them.
Okay.
So you could go to any wholesaler website for the area that you're building in, and just put in a search box, water resources or drainage, and it should come up. And they'll have a lot of statistics in there about predictions and scenarios and the sort of status quo and what their plan is long term as well.
Excellent. Well, that's brilliant. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time and for your presentation.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
So now I'd like to demonstrate in MBS Chorus some of the content related to water and some of the items that Claire talked about. Hopefully many of you will be aware already of the drainage and services content and landscape content that's available in MBS Chorus, and particularly in the Uniclass 2015 libraries. And I've chosen here a few examples, and the first thing to point out is that you can group together content within your specifications using prefix and suffix fields within the content. And so I can search for terms across my content and quickly filter down to find those. So here I've got some drainage examples. And to begin, a surface water below ground drainage pipeline system, and a few of the items that Claire was talking about before. So in terms of being able to specify and outline that the drainage pipeline system is part of a much wider strategy, providing system performance information in terms of compliance with different performance requirements and standards, the types of pipes that are going to be used here, so mentioning the use of medium density and high density polyethylene, so rigid and semi-rigid and flexible pipes, and then also choosing how these are going to be protected and supported. The water industry and drainage does have a huge amount of concrete use, and so where more natural materials and aggregates can be used, that's minimizing some of that concrete use. And then in terms of execution of how this is actually going to be used, we've then got clauses to allow you to begin filling in content around how this pipeline is actually going to be laid and jointed together, ensuring that the most longest unbroken lengths of pipe are used, as Claire mentioned, and also that we minimize the time between laying and testing to ensure that there's no leakages or problems at junctions. The next section is to talk about SUD systems and being able to create a drainage strategy. And again, we have a number of systems in the content for swales and for soakaways. And so here, for example, we've got a granular fill soakaway system. But in our general guidance, you can see the component systems that are available to form a kind of SUDS strategy across the project. Template clauses in here for natural materials, hemp geotextiles that could be used as part of this soakaway. And then again, being able to provide information about the design of this particular system in accordance with, for example, Syria publications and the kind of tolerances and capacities that are going to be required based on local rainfall, but also execution instructions about how to actually form these soakaways and any documentation and other things that are required in terms of its testing and maintenance. Then also talked about reclamation and reusing grey water and rainwater. And we've got reclamation systems within MBS content. So here, for example, the ability to specify rainwater reclamation for WC flushing, for irrigation, and so on. And a couple of examples here in terms of the design of these systems. So again, in accordance with the relevant standards, with water regulations, specifying the specific system that you're going to use, storage capacities, how the actual system and water is going to be applied across your project. And then again, with in terms of installation and testing and documentation, ensuring that we understand the requirements for how this is going to be installed, and referring back to the relevant standards and information so that the guidance will help you to reference off to those and make decisions about what the standards are and what the requirements are. Also worth mentioning metering, which came up, so in terms of specifying water metering, and in this case a fairly simple clause that allows you to specify the design of building monitoring and management systems, and one of those components could be water meters that could be inline, and whether they have analog information, whether they're digital, and whether they're part of wireless communication, about different requirements for the project, and the kind of information that you're trying to refer back to. The last thing I wanted to show you was a couple of examples of MBS Source content from our manufacturers, who often are providing information now to help you find more water efficient products in terms of flow rates and a number of the other items that Claire was mentioning. I've picked out a couple of examples here in terms of two manufacturers who are using technologies to help save water. The first is the Splash Lab, who are creating infrared sensor taps and other items too. But in terms of that infrared technology, you're already saving water by reducing wastage rather than relying on users to shut off the water. Having that auto shut off really helps, and obviously in these touchless times is more hygienic as well. And they use cascade aerators to reduce flow rates. So the first is that you'll see within some of the guidance information around content in MBS Source things like the ability to qualify for BREEAM credits and where they may be possible, and also all of the third-party legislation you would expect to be there in terms of hazardous substances and chemical reaction. And within the flow rate, you can then see that it can be limited to reduce the amount of water coming through the tap head. And also, because this particular item can be battery powered, that can be really useful for retrofit projects where it may not be possible to hook up into the mains, and so for those projects you can use quite efficient systems still. The second example I wanted to show you was Kelder Showers, who are using their air-powered fan technology to atomize water into large droplets and thereby lower water use to as low as 5 litres per minute, without reducing the power or feel of the shower itself. And to demonstrate that, we've got on MBS Source from a number of manufacturers case studies that you can then use to see how these products have been applied in real project situations. And in this case, the London Aquatic Centre, where working with the project team, Kelder demonstrated water and energy savings of 40%, whilst actually improving the shower performance. And we'll continue to work with manufacturers to help them add more of those properties that are going to help you specify water efficient products. This MBS webinar is part of a 4-webinar series on sustainability topics in the run-up to the International UN Summit COP26 on climate change, which is being held in Glasgow at the start of November. So do check out the other webinars if you haven't already, and keep an eye on our website for more content during and after COP26. I look forward to following up on your questions after the session. Please do get in touch if you're interested in using MBS Chorus and MBS Source. Thanks again to Claire, and thank you for attending.